In this video, we shall be talking about a very major event in our history as not just Nigeria but Africa as a whole. We'll be talking about the Benin Expedition of 1897. This, as I have said, is a very major history, and permit me to also include the fact that it is a very sad one too. Now let's get right into it. When the British come into your land, their first aim is to disgrace you, to humiliate you into subjection. It was done in Sierra Leone, where a king was flogged in the presence of his subjects. It was done in South Africa, where it was called apartheid. It was done to Jaja of Okpobo, and of course to Oba Ovonramwen Nogbaisi. Now permit my pronunciation of the name Ovorami, because some will say it is Ovoramwen, some say it is Ovorami. I will just stay with Ovorami, so if that is wrong, just permit me. I am not a Benin man. Oba Aurorami was the king of the ancient Benin Kingdom, or some will say Benin Empire. Oba Aurorami was the paramount ruler, and this is his very tragic story. This is the story of the Benin Expedition of 1897. Benin is the only Nigerian kingdom with the longest relationship with the Europeans, but that doesn't mean that their relationship was cordial. Some historians argue that the Shekiris had a longer relationship, that is, they met with the Europeans before the Beninese, especially the Portuguese, but more historians favor the argument that claim that it was the Benin who actually met first with the Europeans. But that is by the way. After what was done to Jaja of Okpobo, the Benin feared that they would be next, and so they started getting hostile to the white man. It was no longer business as usual, and then the British responded by invading the land. But they disguised this invasion and made it look like the invasion was a response, was a retaliation to what they termed the Benin Massacre. Now this is what really happened. Since the Benin could no longer trust the British, they closed trade with them and banned the British from entering their land. This greatly irritated the British, especially a particular colonial officer whose name was James Phillips. Phillips was the acting consul general at the time. He sent a letter to Oba Ovonramwen saying that he would visit Benin to discuss the reopening of trade, and also to request that the Oba of Benin would allow white people into the land. So in January 1897, Phillips began traveling to Benin along with 6 other officers of the Niger Coast Protectorate, whose names are provided in the description of this video. These men carried boxes with them, and what was in those boxes were actually firearms. Oba Aurorami sent a messenger to Phillips telling him that he won't be able to receive him at this time. He won't be even able to receive any visitor at all, because he was in the middle of the Agwe festival. Again, please pardon my pronunciation. During this festival, this very sacred festival, the king was forbidden from setting eyes on strangers. Non-Beninese are not permitted, foreigners are not permitted at all to enter into the land during this festival. The Agwe festival ceremonies was a month-long period of abstinence and spiritual purification. The Oba added that he would be able to attend to Phillips after the festival had passed, and if only Phillips was going to come alone with no other white man. But Phillips said no and kept on going into Benin anyway. This made the Oba a little apprehensive. If Philip meant well, then why couldn't he just wait? And why couldn't he come alone as they have been doing in the past? 2 Benin officers, Olobosere and Iyashere, were convinced that Phillips was leading an invasion, and they couldn't just sit by and watch this happen. They didn't want to suffer the fate of Jaja of Okpobo and Nana of Ishekiri. On 4 more occasions, messengers were sent to Philip to warn him that that was not a good time to visit the land, but the guy was set in his ways and kept on going anyway. Now, was he being arrogant or just plain stupid? Even the people in his own entourage warned him to obey the Oba, but the guy was just being stubborn. And it is important to note that this trip wasn't even approved by Philip's own superiors. Then the unexpected happened, or the expected by anybody with common sense. Phillips and his men were ambushed by Benin warriors. They were all killed except 2 officers who escaped with serious wounds. This This was now what the British press tagged the Benin Massacre. They made it look like the Oba of Benin had ordered the killing of peaceful British emissaries. There was no mention of the fact that the invasion of Benin was already a planned idea. So they made it look like the invasion of Benin was a retaliation, not a premeditated attack. But we know that it was premeditated, not an afterthought. In February 1897, the British retaliated. They invaded the city of Benin and sacked it. Thousands of souls were killed. Hundreds of villages were burnt down. Mothers, children, civilians, all leveled. It may interest you to be informed that Hausa and Yoruba soldiers were used to conquer the city of Benin, and this was the regular pattern of the British. Their system of colonization was called divide and conquer. Benin warriors were also used to conquer the Ishan people, just as Ishan warriors were used to conquer the cities around their neighborhood. They just capitalized on the ethnic differences already existing and the mutual hate shared by these people. But that one is a whole story on its own, a story for another day. During this attack, this invasion, this expedition of 1897, Oba Ovonramwen had to run into the bush. He became a fugitive, a refugee in his own land, in the land where he was king. 2 days after this invasion, on February 20, 1897, the British started a calculated, systematic destruction of the legacy of Benin. This was when the artworks of the Benins were looted. Another story for another day. Now, after nearly 6 months of hiding in the bush, Oba Aurorami eventually tired of running, of hiding, and then he surrendered himself to the British. Even in defeat, the Oba presented himself in a company of many drummers, 20 wives, 10 chiefs, and 800 followers, and he was richly dressed in coral beads and with a crown on his head. The Beninese are a proud people. Oba Ovonramwen begged to surrender in private, but the British said no. The mighty king of the Benin Empire was derobed in public. His crown was disgracefully removed, and he was made to bow down to the white man in the presence of his own subjects. The people shed tears. This very tragic part of their history still haunts them till this day. Some noble men committed suicide after this sight. A particular chief called Oba Aurorami later killed his own self by slitting his throat. When Ovoramwen was convinced that he was going to be exiled, he ran again. He fled into the bush another time. A particular chief called Ojumo later gave out the hideout of the Oba after being threatened by the British. Some said he wasn't threatened but bribed actually. But some historians claim that the British threatened to kill him and the whole of his family, so he was left with no choice. He had to betray the Oba. Ovoramwen was captured a second time. He tried to bribe his way to liberty by offering to show to the white people where he had hidden his 20 puncheons of palm oil and his 500 ivory tusks. These were great treasures at that time, but alas, the British had already found out where all those were kept. So Oba Aurorami became dejected. That was his last hope, and it was now gone. He was tried on several occasions, and eventually he was shipped out of his own land. While he was being shipped, Oba Aurorami, a king of an empire, cried out for help like a peasant, but he was further disgraced by having his mouth tied. Ovoramwen was deported to Calabar, where he lived the rest of his life as a commoner. He died in 1914, the year of Nigeria's amalgamation. That was how the great empire of Benin was ended, and then it was absorbed into the colony of Nigeria. The playwright Olarotimi wrote a play about this. He titled the play Ovoramwen Nogbaisi. In that play, he presented the history just as it happened, including the part where the king was made to remove his crown in front of his people and bow down to the white man. But the Beninese frowned at this play. They rejected it because it hurt their pride. So they commissioned another playwright to write a play to their own taste. This playwright was Ahmed Yerima, and he did a good job of presenting the Benin people with an edited version of the history. He removed the part where they don't like and retained the part where they would like. Thank you for watching the video to this point. In the future, we'll be sharing the ugly history of how the British stole the artwork of the Benin people. Please keep supporting us by subscribing and sharing this video very aggressively so that it may reach other people also, and they may see what we are doing. Till we see again, remain assured of the fact that Washiri.